Good evening, people. Before we actually get into X Defiant again, I just want to update on the Tyranid deck that I've been working on. So we actually ended up cutting even more mana from the deck than before. So the deck will be a little bit slower taking off, but other than that, I don't think it's going to be terrible. One of the craziest cuts that I think I've made was today, though. I actually cut Soul Ring for hardening scales and put it back in. And I got a few reasons why. The deck is running off of. It's not really exact numbers. It's running off a bunch of cards that do something in the deck but do kind of rely on the commander. So the commander is kind of the most vital part of the deck, I would assume. But once you get to 4 mana, this is how I'm thinking about it. Once you get to 4 mana, you have a guaranteed Soul Ring with your commander because it gives you 2 mana and it copies a spell. And then there's also a creature called like Corvalex in the deck that when you play it, all of your basic lands have tap for 2 generic mana. So you essentially have 2 cards already in the deck that are better versions of Soul Ring, which is kind of why I'm cutting it out. Also, the other part is that Soul Ring, since the commander's kind of part of the main part of the deck that matters, Soul Ring taps for 2 generic, and we only need 1 generic to cast the commander for the first time. So that's the other reason why I'm kind of looking at cutting it for the most part. We also got rid of New Horizons and Opal Palace. So far, the cuts that we have from the pre-con, Opal Palace, Overgrowth, New Horizons, Soul Ring, Abundance, Cave of Temptation, Cultivate, Ash Barrens, Rampant Growth. That's loud. Ash Barrens, Rampant Growth, Lictor, Death Leaper Terror Weapon, Harrow, Tyranid Invasion, Explore, the First Tyrannic War, Gargoyle Flock, Jerson Sworn Killer Morph, Shadow in the Warp, Gene Stiller Locust, the Red Terror, Herald's Horn, Acolyte Hybrid, Goliath Truck, Icon of Ancestry, Farseek. Those are all things that we've cut from the precon for the most part. And then we do have Rite of Passage, which we've taken out and still haven't put it back into the deck from the additions list. Rite of Passage, I'm not 100% sure on. It's 3 mana. Whenever a creature controls dealt damage, put a 1/1 counter on it. I don't know how I feel about it. I do like the artwork quite a lot, though, so it's still on my radar to put back into the deck. And then in the deck right now, we basically put in things like Patriarch's Seal to kind of give us a little bit more mana fixing and go with our commander, Thousand Year Elixir, um, Mage Rite Stone, I believe, things that untap the commander and we can tap them again. Helm of the Host is in there. So we have about Lithoform Engine and Strionic Resignator. There's about 8 cards in the deck, I believe, that can untap or untap the commander or copy the commander, like Twinning Staff. So we got about 8 cards in the deck already that can copy the commander's effect. We still have 4 Tyranids that we could potentially cut from our cut list. We had potentially a card draw spell that we could have cut from the cut list if we didn't want any more card draw spells, but we have quite a few card draw spells, but there's already there's like 13 or 14 Ravenous spells, which can give us quite a bit of card draw with all the copies that we do. So, we can draw like 2, 3, 4 cards depending on how many copy effects that we have, as long as the commander's on the field. And then Coastal Piracy and all those, we have 4 cards that are pretty much similar to that card, where whenever we deal damage or attack, we draw cards equal to the amount of creatures that we attack with and stuff. So that could be potentially very good. And then we have greater good. So we have like 5 cards that are like really powerful draws, and then we have like 14 other cards that are like our main deck creatures, but also additional card draw. The removal is where we're kind of lacking for the most part, and it's basically we only have 2 cards that can kind of deal with artifacts and enchantments in the deck currently, so that's kind of a problem. But essentially, if you see someone running an artifact or enchantment deck, they're going to have to be priority target, and then you're going to have to filter through your deck to find that combo piece to break through, and kind of deal with them as quickly as you can. The what you call it? Out of the cards that we can cut, also, we're thinking about adding in creatures that can untap the commander as well. And it's kind of this weird thing where like these creatures are like 2, 3 drop creatures, something along those lines, and they can untap and tap the commander, which so they're basically kind of a Soul Ring, kind of not. But we already have like 8 cards that can copy the commander or the effect, along with other effects. But we could take out potentially, 2 to 4 Tyranids, and then we could put in 2 to 4 additional copies, which would give us like 12 copy trigger things that we can do with the commander. Or you know we have a bunch of other cards, like we can lower the amount of card draw we could have, we could lower the amount of win cons we could have, like Simic Ascendancy. But Simic Ascendancy seems like it's too strong not to have in the deck as just an instant I win card in one turn, especially when we have like Doubling Season and Primal Vigor in there, and the Ozolith and Bread for the Hunt, things along those, and even the Biomancer Master guy. Like any of those cards, if we have them on the field, and then we play Simic Ascendancy with any creature, literally, like if we have a creature with like say 5/1/1 counters on it, um, we play Simic Ascendancy, we play a creature, or that creature dies and it goes on the Ozolith. So 5 counters go on the Ozolith. Doubling Season triggers, goes up to 10 counters. Next turn, you play a creature. You put the counters from the Ozolith on the creature. It doubles again. You get 20 counters. Simic Ascendancy triggers. Because you would have 20 counters go on Simic Ascendancy, and those would double, so you'd have 40 counters on Simic Ascendancy. So you'd have a ton of counters and stuff going. Like the deck basically is trying to multiply the amount of counters that you can have. And we cut Soul Ring for Hardened Scales because it's a 1 drop card that can basically give us 1 additional counter whenever we add a counter to a creature. So it goes well with the commander. But we also have the Fragmented Ozolith card, and um, I think an artifact. I don't remember exactly. We have 3 cards in the deck that basically is like whenever something gets 1/1/1 counter, it gets that plus an additional 1/1 counter. So being able to have that would help the commander quite a lot, but also could potentially double, triple, quadruple, depending on what we have going on in the deck. But the base thing here is that you're going to have to fix the mana at some point, which I'm going to try and do eventually. Basically, we have a couple of lands that we're going to slot in that are like dual lands, because the deck is basically relying on you having the colors that you need for your commander. If you don't have the colors that your commander needs, then your deck's going to basically stall. But as soon as the commander hits the board, things are going to pop off very quickly. And that's where I think the deck's going to be kind of interesting. It's going to mimic a Tyranid Invasion, I think, pretty well. You'll either pop off immediately at the very beginning of the game and swarm over everybody, or you're going to slowly kind of build up and just kind of politic your way as before you pop off with your commander. It's not super crazy strong. I don't think is going to be a big deal with it, but it is very, very strong once you get creatures on the board. That's kind of the game plan. But overall, I think it's pretty solid at the moment. Venom Thrope and Venom Thrope, Titanic Hydra, and Ravenger. Some other card that's in there. I think Simic Ascendancy was one of them. They're all cards that I'm kind of like, you could just put tap, untap cards there, and it would just be better with the commander, I think. Like, even Simic Ascendancy, yeah, it's an I win card for the most part, and you can pay to put 1/1 counters on things, but it's not like a card that I would miss necessarily if I had a tap untapper in there instead, because then I would be basically replacing it with a card that's like get 2 mana and copy an X spell. But the deck also has a number of like board wipe type esque removals and 1/1 counter stuff, so it's hard to say. Um, we'll set on Rite of Passage for now, because it's just whenever your creature is dealt damage, you put a 1/1 counter on it. But I feel like the card has a lot of potential. It's just if your creature is very small and you swing in with it, it's gonna get 1/1 counter. If it dies before the counter gets put on it, it loses that counter. So you're looking at creatures that have like really big power already, or you're looking at creatures that have trample. They can kind of get over, and then they would grow an additional one. But where this gets interesting though is like if you have Rite of Passage down and you have like let's say you have Hardened Scales or the Oslo thing or something else on the board, and then you have like Doubling Season on the board, then you would swing in, do some damage, Rite of Passage triggers, so you get a 1/1 counter, and then Hardened Scales triggers, so you get two 1/1 counters, and then the Doubling Season would end up going off, so you get like four 1/1 counters just for swinging in, which is kind of big. So I would be tempted to put this in instead of something like Bone Sabers, which is already in the deck. And a lot of people cut Bone Sabers, but I've kept Bone Sabers in there because yes, it's 6 mana, but Bone Sabers is also a card that gives you four 1/1 counters whenever you attack with a creature. And with how many copying effects that we have, it's already pretty massive in general. Like, it gives you four 1/1 counters with Doubling Season. It's going to be eight 1/1 counters in just one turn. And then if you have anything like Hardening Scales or anything out there, you're looking at 9, 10 1/1 counters. And then you're looking at, if we have Lithoform Engine or Strionic Resignator out there, you could basically double that effect, so you'd have like 20 1/1 counters in one turn. So there's a lot of combos with 1/1 counters just getting bigger and bigger and bigger that this deck could do, which is why I don't think we necessarily need Simic Ascendancy. But I could see the point of having Simic Ascendancy, of being like, if you have that card out and there's like a Pillow Fort deck or something you can't get over, or you just can't attack or do anything at all, it's like the one card that you could play to kind of negate the effect, I think. I also think that adding additional untappers for the deck could potentially be good, which is why I think, as much as I like Venom Thrope, I think Venom Thrope might be cut. Ravenger is still a draw card, and it's also kind of protection because it forces them to attack another enemy instead of you. But I could see that being cut short at some point. It is nice that it has flash, but I think having untappers could potentially be better as well. Like, it's a threat that your opponent has to deal with. But I'm split because I already have like 8 cards in the deck that can copy the commander's effect, right? But most of those cards are like in artifacts. So if I use creatures, they're bound to be cheaper and stuff, but you can't use them the first turn as soon as you play them. But also they can get wiped out with your Tyranids, whereas your commander, um, and like the artifacts, it has to be targeted artifact removal. But I don't have any artifact recursion in the deck, I only have creature recursion, which is why I think maybe I should put creatures in there. But Rite of Passage is kind of on the fence going in. But Venom Thrope, I'm tempted to like cut. It's probably the biggest one I would cut. I don't think I would want to cut the Titanic. I keep thinking Titanic Hydra now. Um, the Bio Titan. I don't think I would want to cut it, even though everyone else cuts it, because it's pay 5 counters, get a 12/12 like Vigilance Reach Trample, or not Trample. It's like a Vigilance Reach, you know, Tyranid, which you might think is like super crazy, but I could easily see that coming into play like very early. Um, so it's something that could be a powerhouse very early into the game, and it's something that could become a powerhouse at the very end of the game, because a 12/12 out of nowhere for 2 mana, so you put in like 10 counters on it, or you put like Bone Sabers on it, it's going to be a game-ending threat in and of itself. Kind of hard to deal with card, so should be interesting anyway. But the 2 creatures, well, there's actually more than that. There's like 4+ creatures that you can get that can untap and tap your commander. And that's where I'm kind of iffy, because we could slot like 4 creatures into the deck and it isn't really going to bother the deck too much. But is it worth more than the Bio Titan? Because like the Bio Titan can pop off early and late, but if you put like a 2-drop tap creature in there, then that's already going to be potentially 2 extra mana and a copied spell of a normal Tyranid, which is kind of a big deal in and of itself, I think. But we also have like a lot of like board wipe type esque removal that we could potentially like cut down a little bit if we wanted to. All in all, though, I think the deck's going to be pretty decent just for like a normal pod, but I think we might have too much card draw. That's where I'm really interested to see, because the untap effect, copying the ravenous creatures. If we copy like, so say you play a ravenous creature, like really the deck, the mana value on the card seems like it's pretty high, but like realistically, if you get to 6 mana, that's all you're really looking for. And the commander already gives you 2, so you only really need 4 mana for the deck to start functioning. But if they blow up your commander consistently, that's when the deck will get hampered to a point where you can't really play it as much, I don't think. But right now it's like as long as you can get your 6 mana, so like turn 4, then you're instantly going to be getting bumped up to like 8 mana or something. Like that's how you got to look at it, is you're guaranteed essentially to get 6 mana on turn 4. But any of these doubling spells, because a lot of them are like 2 or 3 mana. So like, let's say that you draw into one of them, you play it turn 3, then you play your commander turn 4. Well, now you've jumped up to 8 mana, turn 4, turn 5. Then you're playing, your creature spells, your ravenous spells for 6. So, okay, let's say like turn 5 hits, you have a ravenous spell, you have a copy or like a tapper to untapper for your commander. So you tap your commander, pay 1, untap it, tap your commander again. Um, then you have 4 mana. You put a couple more mana into there. You play something for 6. You copy the spell 2 times. Those come in. You draw 3 cards. You still have a couple of mana floating around. You have 3 creatures, 3 cards, a couple of floating extra mana, a 1/1 counter that your commander's going to put on something, and that should be fairly consistent as long as you have your colors. The mana ramp in the deck as well. The tappers and untappers basically are mana ramp in the deck, but also not, because you're not going to have a ton of colors for your deck, but we have a number of creatures in the deck that potentially draw out a bunch of basic lands. So like Harrow Specs and stuff like that. Things that can consume the 1/1 counters for mana, things that you can play that draw lands out of your deck really quickly. I don't remember if it was Pure Strain Gene Stiller or not. One of them that uses 1/1 counters to pull out lands, and then things with like Stronic Resignator and stuff, you could copy that and double the effect. So there's a number of things that you can do with that just alone. Whereas, or even the motorcycle dude that's in the deck, trample haste, when it attacks, you get a basic land. So if any of those hit the field, you could potentially draw out a ton of lands from your deck on top of that. So your ramp in the deck is card draw. The other ramp in your deck, or it's the ramp in your deck is deck thinning, but also kind of card draw because you could put multiple lands out in a turn. The ramp that isn't card draw is doubling the spells that you're playing, so it's kind of, or the other stuff is kind of creature spells and kind of card draw with the Ravenous cards. And then you have your big hitting card draw spells, which could potentially become huge. Like, I feel like the deck might deck itself out because Coastal Piracy, Kindred Discovery, all of those, like Coastal Piracy, Bred for the Hunt, and the other one, they require you to deal damage. So those aren't super worried. I'm not super worried about. Kindred Discovery is whenever they enter and whenever they attack, you draw cards, which is pretty good. But then, like, Greater Good, you sack a creature and you draw cards equal to its power. And we've already seen how many cards that could potentially be, because like literally in a couple of turns you could have a creature that's a 12/12 or a 20/20, and you could draw like 20 cards out of your deck, and then a lot of those are going to have to go into your graveyard, and then you only are going to have 2 or 3 graveyard cards in the deck. We have another spell that's going to be coming. So basically, Finale of Glory and there's some other card that I have coming are spells that are basically X spells, but you can tutor out cards from your deck, or you can bring them from your graveyard to your hand. So we'll have 2 spells that we can copy with the X spell triggers that could potentially tutor any creature that we want out of our deck for a win con, or bring back any X spells and stuff from our graveyard to our hand so that we recast them and get the X trigger off of it. And then we'll have the Paleolith, or whatever its name is, that whenever you play a creature spell of 5 or greater, I believe, you get to bring a creature back from the graveyard to your hand. So, with a Ravenous spell, for instance, if we're copying it 2 or 3 times, you play it, boom, they come in, it triggers the Paleo thing. You get like 4 creatures back in hand, and it's just the engine that you can get back. But we are only going to have a few ways to do that, and if you end up milling those out or losing them, that's the problem. So if the card draw gets too crazy, those graveyard recursions are going to be the biggest deal. Late game, you could also use those to tutor out like your most important cards from your graveyard or your deck to try and end the game out, or at least the vast majority of them. You're going to be able to like tutor out your X drop uh, artifact and enchantment destruction creature, or board wipe creature you could draw out. There's a number of things that could happen there. Um, yeah, it's just a lot of craziness that could happen in the deck, which is kind of hard to plan for. And I already forgot about that other spell. So Venom Thrope probably gonna get cut either way, because it's like the one card that I'm looking at that I'm like, I like Venom Thrope because it's in the precon. When I played the precon with no upgrades, Venom Thrope was always that card that stuck around and protected me from my opponents because it has hexproof. And that's realistically all it was. It was a flying Death Touch hexproof creature. They didn't want to attack into it because it had Death Touch, and they couldn't destroy because it had a hexproof. But in this deck, it probably isn't that super important. But when we look at like the lore of Warhammer because that's what I've kind of been looking at. Venom thropes also are like sent in as like poisonous death creatures. They're supposed to travel in packs and stuff, but it doesn't really do a whole lot for the deck. So I'd probably slot in that other graveyard recursion card in place of the Venom thrope. I take the Biotitan. I would try to keep the Biotitan in there, but who knows? Maybe we cut a little bit of card draw or something. I mean, there's only 8 cards or so, I think, that are still on the potential cut block for the most part. And then we'll have 2 lands, you know, 2, 3 lands, maybe a little bit more if we get more dual lands at some point to kind of fix the mana base of the commander. But we still need to keep some basics floating around. Um, yeah, we've kind of gotten rid of most of the lands that give us just generic mana and stuff from the commander, or from the precon as well. I think Exotic Orchard or whatever that one card is probably also a potential cut that we could do for like a Tri-land or something at some point. Because it taps for a mana of any color that our opponents could produce, and so that's kind of it essentially could just be like a generic mana. Like if I'm going against 3 black decks, it just seems like a risk compared to like a Tri-land. But I don't know if there's any other Tri-lands that we could do in the deck. We basically just need a few more lands to round out the mana base to get options, because I think the 2 lands that I found are like green and blue are the 2 colors that we got coming. So if I add 2 dual lands for green and blue, then I would want 2 dual lands for like red and blue and red and green, I think. Or you'd need 6, something along those lines. But I'll get back to the X Defiant. Y'all guys have a good one, and we'll try to play this deck at some point.